They called her just maintenance. A nobody in greasy work clothes who fixed planes for minimum wage. The businessman next to her laughed into his phone about sitting beside some cleaning lady. The flight attendants smiled with pity. Nobody knew the woman in seat 23B was Captain Elena Rodriguez, call sign Reaper, the most feared fighter pilot in Air Force history. Nobody knew until the captain's heart stopped at 37,000 feet, and F-22 Raptors scrambled, calling her name with reverence that shook the entire cabin. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The fluorescent lights of Terminal C cast harsh shadows across the gate area as passengers shuffled toward the boarding bridge. Elena Rodriguez pulled her work jacket tighter, the faded blue fabric marked with grease stains and the company logo barely visible after countless wash cycles. Her hands still smelled of hydraulic fluid despite scrubbing them 3 times in the maintenance hangar bathroom. The red toolbox she carried identified her immediately. Just another maintenance worker heading home after a long shift, nothing special, nobody important. She found her seat in row 23, a middle seat because maintenance workers got whatever was left when booking last minute with employee standby tickets. The businessman in the aisle seat pulled his leather briefcase closer as she approached, his eyes scanning her dirty work boots and oil-stained pants with barely concealed distaste. The woman at the window seat, dressed in an expensive business suit, wrinkled her nose slightly and turned toward the window, creating as much distance as possible. Elena settled into her seat without comment, tucking her small backpack under the seat in front of her. She was used to this treatment. For the past 18 months, she had been invisible, just another blue-collar worker in a world that valued pilots and executives while barely noticing the people who actually kept the planes flying. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, their smiles bright and professional for first-class passengers, polite but distant for those in the back. One flight attendant paused at her row, noticing Elena's uniform. "Long shift?" she asked with the kind of sympathy people reserve for those they consider doing difficult manual labor for little pay. "You guys work so hard. My brother-in-law is a mechanic too. Says it's tough work, always on your feet, getting dirty." Elena smiled slightly. It has its moments. She didn't correct the assumption that she was a mechanic. She didn't explain that she understood aircraft systems at a level most mechanics never reached, that she could tear down and rebuild a turbofan engine blindfolded. The businessman beside her was on his phone, speaking loudly about a business deal. "Yeah, I'm on the plane now," he said importantly. "Should land around 8. These flights are always packed with random people. Sitting next to some maintenance lady who probably cleans the planes or something." He laughed, not bothering to lower his voice. Elena stared straight ahead, her face expressionless. She had learned not to react. What none of them knew was that Elena Rodriguez had once been Captain Elena Rodriguez, call sign Reaper, one of the most decorated fighter pilots in Air Force history. She had flown missions that remained classified, executed maneuvers that defied physics, and earned a reputation among military aviators as someone who could pull off the impossible. She had trained on F-15s, transitioned to F-22 Raptors, and spent 3 years as a test pilot pushing experimental aircraft beyond their design limits. She had flown combat missions in 3 different theaters, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross twice, and had been on track to become one of the youngest squadron commanders in Air Force history. Then everything had fallen apart. Not because of anything she had done wrong, but because she had refused to stay silent when she witnessed safety violations being covered up by a senior officer more interested in meeting deadlines than ensuring pilot safety. She had reported what she saw through proper channels, provided evidence, and watched as the investigation somehow turned toward her instead. Questions about her judgment, suggestions that she was unstable, hints that perhaps the pressure had gotten to her. The officer she had reported was well-connected and ruthless in protecting his career. She had been given a choice: accept a medical retirement with full benefits and a non-disclosure agreement, or face a formal investigation that would drag on for years and destroy her reputation. She had chosen to walk away, taking her retirement and her silence, but losing the only thing she had ever truly loved: flying. The non-disclosure agreement prevented her from explaining what had really happened, so she simply said she had left the Air Force for personal reasons. Unable to fly commercially because of the circumstances of her retirement and unwilling to sit behind a desk, she had taken the only aviation job she could find that kept her close to aircraft: maintenance. She had the technical knowledge, the security clearance, and the work ethic. Nobody asked questions about a former pilot working maintenance. They assumed she had washed out, failed some evaluation, or simply couldn't handle the pressure. She let them believe whatever made them comfortable. The aircraft pushed back from the gate, and Elena automatically noted the auxiliary power unit tone, the gentle thump of the tug connecting to the nose gear, and the professional cadence of the captain's voice over the intercom. Captain Mitchell had a good voice, calm and confident. She wondered idly how many hours he had, what aircraft he had flown before the 737. Then she forced herself to stop thinking like a pilot. That part of her life was over. The taxi to the runway took 12 minutes. They held short of runway 27 for 3 minutes while 2 arrivals landed, then received clearance and rolled into position. The engine spooled up with that distinctive whine that always made Elena's heart beat faster. Rotation speed, gear up, initial climb, and they were airborne, Boston falling away beneath them as they climbed through scattered clouds toward cruise altitude. 20 minutes into the flight, Elena felt the aircraft level off at 37,000 feet. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers immediately began moving around the cabin. The businessman beside Elena had fallen asleep almost immediately. The woman at the window was reading a magazine, occasionally glancing at Elena's dirty work boots with visible disapproval. The flight attendants began their beverage service. Elena requested coffee, black, and the attendant handed it to her with a sympathetic smile. "Rough day at work?" Elena nodded. "They're all rough," she said truthfully, though not for the reasons the attendant assumed. 38 minutes into the flight, somewhere over upstate New York, everything changed. Elena heard it first, a change in the cockpit voice on the intercom, a slight edge of stress that triggered every alarm in her trained awareness. "Folks, we're experiencing a minor issue up front," the first officer's voice said, trying to sound calm. "Nothing to be concerned about, but we're going to keep the seatbelt sign on. Flight attendants, please take your seats." Elena sat up straighter, her coffee forgotten. That wasn't a minor issue announcement. That was the sound of a pilot trying not to panic passengers while dealing with something serious. The flight attendants moved quickly to their jump seats. One of them, a senior attendant named Margaret, keyed her intercom. The response was inaudible to passengers, but Elena watched Margaret's face go pale. Elena unbuckled and stood, moving into the aisle. The businessman woke up. "Hey, sit down. Seatbelt signs on." Elena ignored him, moving forward quickly. She reached the front galley just as Margaret emerged from the cockpit, her face ashen. Another flight attendant grabbed Margaret's arm. "What's happening?" Margaret's voice shook. "Captain Mitchell collapsed. Just fell over. The first officer thinks it's a heart attack. He's trying to fly the plane and help the captain at the same time, and he's completely overwhelmed. We need a doctor." Elena didn't hesitate. "I can help. I'm a pilot. A trained pilot. Let me talk to your first officer." Both attendants stared at her maintenance uniform. Margaret shook her head. "We need a doctor, not—" Elena cut her off. "I know. But I can fly this aircraft. Former Air Force, multiple ratings, thousands of hours. Your first officer is alone with a medical emergency and a plane full of people. He needs help immediately." Before Margaret could decide, the cockpit door burst open and First Officer David Chin stumbled out, his face red with fear. "We need a doctor immediately. Captain Mitchell isn't breathing properly. I had to leave the controls to drag him out of his seat. The autopilot is on, but I can't handle this alone." Elena spoke with unmistakable authority. "First Officer Chin, I'm a pilot. Former Air Force, multiple ratings. I can take the right seat and handle aircraft operations while you coordinate the emergency. We need to declare an emergency and find the nearest suitable airport. Every second we waste puts everyone at greater risk." Chin stared at her for 3 seconds. Then training took over. "Can you verify your credentials?" Elena pulled out her wallet, extracting her expired Air Force ID card and her FAA commercial pilot certificate with all ratings clearly visible. Chin glanced at them and nodded sharply. "Get in the cockpit. Right seat. Now." Elena moved past him quickly, stepping over Captain Mitchell's prone form where passengers with medical training were now gathered, and slipped into the right seat. Her hands moved automatically, adjusting the seat, checking instruments, scanning the flight management system. The Boeing 737 was different from the fighters she had flown, but the fundamentals were the same. Airspeed, altitude, heading, system status. Chin slid back into the captain's seat, his relief visible. "I've never dealt with a captain incapacitation before. This is my first year at the airline. 700 hours total time. I'm not qualified for this." Elena's voice was calm, steady. "Yes, you are. You're qualified because you're here and you're the captain now. I'm your first officer. We're going to work this together. Declare an emergency with ATC. What's our fuel state?" Chin keyed his radio. Cleveland Center, SkyWest 4316, declaring an emergency. Captain incapacitated, medical emergency, requesting priority handling and direct routing to nearest suitable airport with full medical facilities. The controller's voice came back immediately. SkyWest 4316, emergency declared, Squawk 7700. Nearest suitable airport is Buffalo Niagara, distance 62 miles. Clear direct, descend and maintain 10,000. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. Chin responded while Elena's hands moved across the flight management system, programming the new routing. 147 souls on board, fuel for 2 hours 15 minutes. As they worked, Elena could hear the commotion in the cabin behind them, medical personnel working on Captain Mitchell, flight attendants trying to keep passengers calm. But in the cockpit, things were becoming organized. Chin was functioning better now that he had support. They were descending through 25,000 feet when Elena heard the radio call that changed everything. A different frequency, military, encrypted but automatically patched through. SkyWest 4316, this is Gunfighter 1-1, 2 F-22s scrambled from your position for emergency air support. We're at your 4 o'clock 5 miles. We'll be monitoring your situation. Please acknowledge. Elena's blood ran cold. F-22s. Raptors. Her aircraft, her community, the world she had left behind. Chin glanced at her, confused. Why would they scramble fighters for a medical emergency? Elena shook her head, not understanding. She keyed the radio. Gunfighter 1-1, SkyWest 4316, we copy. This is a medical emergency, captain incapacitation, no other issues. We're direct Buffalo Niagara. We don't require fighter support. There was a pause, then the voice came back with an edge of confusion. SkyWest, understand medical emergency. We were scrambled on a security alert, something about a passenger manifest flag. Say again, no security issues? Elena's mind raced. Passenger manifest flag? The only reason her name would flag security alerts was if someone had run her identification through military databases. She keyed the radio again. Gunfighter, confirm security alert on passenger manifest. Can you clarify what triggered the scramble? Another pause, longer this time. When the voice came back there was a different tone, careful, almost cautious. SkyWest, we received an alert that a former military aviator with specific high-level clearances was on your flight. Given the emergency circumstances, Command wanted positive identification and support assets in place. The manifest shows Captain Elena Rodriguez, call sign Reaper, former F-22 pilot and test pilot. SkyWest, can you confirm the status of Captain Rodriguez? The radio went silent in Elena's hand. She stared at the instruments, feeling Chen's eyes on her, feeling the weight of her past crashing into her present. Behind her, the cockpit door opened slightly. Margaret's voice was shocked. Did he just say Captain Rodriguez? Did he just call you Reaper? Chen's voice was very quiet. Who are you? Elena took a slow breath, then keyed the radio. Gunfighter 1-1, this is Captain Elena Rodriguez, call sign Reaper. I am safe, no hostile activity, pure medical emergency. I'm currently acting as first officer for this flight. Captain incapacitation, First Officer Chin is performing as captain. We are managing the situation and require no intervention beyond standard emergency support. The response came back immediately, and this time Elena could hear the awe in the pilot's voice. Reaper? Actual Reaper? Ma'am, this is Captain Jake Morrison, Gunfighter 1-1. I studied your tactics at Nellis. Your mission in the Taiwan Strait, the way you outmaneuvered 6 enemy fighters with a damaged aircraft, that's taught as required reading now. Ma'am, half the F-22 community knows your name. We thought you'd retired to some desk job. It's an honor to provide support, ma'am. Elena closed her eyes briefly. The Taiwan Strait mission. The one that had earned her the Distinguished Flying Cross and nearly killed her. The one that had been classified for 2 years before being turned into a case study. She had been trying to forget that mission for 18 months, and now it was being broadcast over open radio with 147 people listening. Chin was staring at her openly now. Your Reaper? The Reaper? I read about you in training. They said you were a legend, that you'd done things that were supposed to be impossible. You're working maintenance? Why? Elena didn't answer, focused on the approach procedures. We can discuss my employment history later. Right now we have an emergency landing to execute. Buffalo Niagara is straight ahead, 28 miles. We need to brief the approach, run the checklists, and get this aircraft safely on the ground. But the radio continued. Gunfighter 1-1 came back, and this time there was a second voice, the wingman equally stunned. Reaper, this is Gunfighter 1-2, Captain Lisa Park. Ma'am, you trained my instructor. He said you were the best stick he'd ever seen. If you're managing this emergency, those passengers don't know how lucky they are. We'll maintain escort and ensure your airspace is completely clear. Behind Elena, the cockpit was filling with people. Margaret was there, tears running down her face. Several passengers were crowding the doorway, including the businessman who had dismissed her as just maintenance, his face pale with shock. Everyone was silent, listening to the F-22 pilots speak to Elena with reverence. Chin found his voice. You could have said something. When you came to the cockpit, you could have told us you were one of the most decorated pilots in military history. Why did you just say you were a pilot like it was nothing? Elena's hands moved across the controls, setting up the approach. Because I am a pilot and that's all that matters right now. My history doesn't fly this plane. My training does. Now run the before landing checklist. We're 6 minutes from touchdown. Buffalo approach came on frequency, their controller's voice carrying the same odd respect. SkyWest 4316 Buffalo approach, we've been advised that Captain Rodriguez is assisting with the emergency. Ma'am, we have every emergency vehicle on the field positioned for your arrival. Runway 25 is clear, winds 270 at 8 knots. You're cleared for ILS 25. Elena acknowledged professionally, her hands and chins working together to configure the aircraft for landing. Flaps, gear, speed brakes, everything coming together with practiced precision. She could feel the aircraft responding to her inputs, the air flowing over the wings, the weight shifting as they descended through 10,000 feet, then 5,000, then captured the glide slope and rode it down toward the runway. The businessman from her row had pushed into the cockpit. You're really a fighter pilot? He asked, his voice shaking. One of the best? And you were sitting next to me in maintenance clothes and I said you were just some maintenance lady. I said that while you were sitting right there. Elena didn't take her eyes off the instruments. You weren't wrong. I do work maintenance. I clean aircraft, I repair them. It's honest work. The fact that I used to fly fighters doesn't make that work less valuable. The landing was perfect, a textbook touchdown that barely registered, smooth and professional despite the emergency. Elena and Chin worked together to bring the aircraft to a stop on the runway, emergency vehicles surrounding them immediately, medics rushing aboard to take Captain Mitchell to the hospital. As the engine spooled down, Elena sat back in her seat, suddenly exhausted. Chin turned to face her fully. Why? He asked simply. Why are you working maintenance? Why aren't you flying? Any operator in the world would hire you. You're a legend. And you're working maintenance, getting treated like you're nobody. Why? Elena unbuckled her harness and stood. Through the cockpit window, she could see the F-22s making a low pass over the airport, a salute from one pilot to another. Because sometimes circumstances force you to make choices that don't make sense to anyone else. Because sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything you care about. Because I love aviation, and if I can't fly, at least I can keep aircraft safe on the ground. Margaret appeared in the doorway. Captain Rodriguez, the passengers want to thank you. They want to see you. Your name is going to be everywhere. Elena shook her head. First Officer Chin saved them. He stayed calm under pressure, managed the emergency. I just helped. Chin's voice was firm. That's not true. When Captain Mitchell collapsed, I panicked. You came into this cockpit and turned chaos into organization in 30 seconds. Your presence made me a better pilot. That's what saved this flight. The passengers were waiting when Elena finally emerged from the cockpit, the entire cabin standing, some crying, all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe to shame. The businessman from her row stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. I need to apologize. I treated you like you were nobody. I made assumptions based on your clothes, your job. I said terrible things while you were sitting right there, and all the time you were someone who had served our country with incredible distinction. I'm so sorry. The woman from the window seat was next, her expensive suit rumpled. You saved us. You saved all of us, and I spent the whole flight looking down on you, judging you, thinking I was better than you. But you're a hero. An actual hero. And I didn't even bother to see who you really were. Elena looked at all of them, these people who had dismissed her, made assumptions about her worth. She didn't feel angry. She felt tired and somehow freed. I appreciate your words. But I wasn't a hero today. I was just a person with training who happened to be in the right place. The clothes I wear, the job I do, none of that changes my value as a human being. I was the same person in that maintenance uniform that I am right now. The only thing that changed is your perception. She paused. I work maintenance because I love aviation and because circumstances took me out of the cockpit. I'm good at maintenance. I'm proud of the work I do. The fact that I used to fly fighters doesn't make that work less important. Every person who keeps aircraft safe matters. I hope you'll remember that next time you see someone in a work uniform and make assumptions about who they are. The debriefing took 3 hours. FAA inspectors, airline officials, everyone wanted statements about the emergency. First Officer Chin insisted repeatedly that Elena had saved the flight, that without her intervention he would have lost control. The airline's chief pilot looked at Elena with wonder. I read your file after the FAA called me. Former F-22 pilot, test pilot, decorated combat veteran, forced retirement under circumstances not specified. You're working maintenance for us and nobody knew. Elena shrugged. I applied for a maintenance position, got hired based on my qualifications. Nobody asked if I used to fly fighters, so I didn't mention it. It wasn't relevant to the job I was doing. The chief pilot shook his head. It's relevant now. The airline wants to offer you a pilot position, captain track, full training provided. After what you did today, we'd be insane not to get you back in a cockpit where you belong. Elena felt her heart skip. A pilot position. Everything she had lost, offered back. She could fly again, could return to the left seat, could spend her days doing what she loved. For a moment, she let herself imagine it. Then reality crashed back. I have agreements. Non-disclosure agreements related to my Air Force separation. They may prevent me from flying commercially. I'd need to consult with lawyers. The chief pilot frowned. What kind of agreements prevent someone with your qualifications from flying? Unless someone wanted to make sure you stayed quiet about something, and they used your career as leverage. That's what happened, isn't it? Elena didn't answer, couldn't answer without violating the agreements. The chief pilot swore quietly. We have lawyers too. If you're interested in flying again, we'll fight whatever bureaucratic nonsense is keeping you on the ground. You deserve to be flying. The media found her eventually, cameras and reporters swarming outside the terminal. By that evening, every news channel was running stories about the legendary fighter pilot who had been working maintenance in obscurity and emerged to save a commercial flight. The internet exploded with discussion, military forums filled with posts from pilots who had served with her or studied her tactics. 3 days after the emergency, Elena's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Captain Rodriguez, this is General Patricia Hawkins, Air Combat Command. I need to speak with you about your situation. I'm aware of the circumstances surrounding your retirement, and I'm not satisfied with how things were handled. The attention from your recent actions has reopened certain doors. Would you be willing to meet with me? Elena's hand shook. General Hawkins was a legend herself, known for her integrity and fierce protection of her pilots. Yes, ma'am. I'd be willing to meet. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at a nearby base. General Hawkins sat across from Elena, her expression serious. Captain Rodriguez, I've reviewed your file completely, including the sealed portions. I've also reviewed the investigation that led to your retirement. What happened to you was an injustice. You reported legitimate safety concerns, followed proper procedures, and were punished for it by someone protecting his career. That officer has since been removed from his position. She opened a folder. Here's what I'm authorized to offer. Full reinstatement to active duty at your current rank with back pay for the 18 months you've been out. Alternatively, if you prefer civilian flying, we'll void the non-disclosure agreements and provide documentation to any airline that your retirement was not for cause. Either way, we want you flying again. Elena stared at the documents, her mind reeling. Everything she had lost, suddenly offered back. The choice she thought was irreversible, suddenly reversed. She could return to the Air Force, could climb back into an F-22. Or she could fly commercially. Both options were there, waiting. I need time, she said quietly. 18 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to fly to serve. Then it was all taken away and I had to figure out who I was without it. I learned that I could find purpose in other work, that my value wasn't solely defined by being in a cockpit. Now you're offering it all back and I need to figure out if that's still what I want or if I've changed too much. General Hawkins nodded. Take whatever time you need. But Rodriguez, I want you to understand something. What you did on that commercial flight, the way you handled that emergency, that wasn't just good piloting. That was exceptional leadership under pressure. You turned a panicking first officer into a functioning captain in seconds. Those qualities are rare and precious. Elena left the meeting with the folder tucked under her arm, her mind churning. She drove back to her small apartment and sat on her couch staring at the documents that offered her life back. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from former squadron mates who had seen the news, calls from reporters, emails from aviation organizations. First Officer Chen called that evening. "Captain Rodriguez, I wanted you to know that Captain Mitchell is going to be okay. He had a heart attack, but they got him to the hospital in time. He'll make it. And he asked to meet you to thank you personally." Elena felt relief wash over her. "I'm glad he's okay. That's the only thing that really matters. How are you doing?" Chen's voice was thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what you said about how my history doesn't fly the plane my training does. You were right. When I stopped thinking about what I didn't know and focused on what I did know, everything became clearer. You taught me that in about 30 seconds, and it's a lesson I'll carry for my entire career." The airline formally offered her a captain position 3 days later, with accelerated training. The salary was good, the benefits excellent, and the chief pilot made it clear they would support whatever she needed. The Air Force offer came through official channels, with General Hawkins personally calling to explain the details. Reinstatement as a major with a clear path to promotion. Assignment to an F-22 squadron of her choice. Elena spent a week weighing the options, talking to mentors, seeking advice. Everyone had opinions. Former military colleagues urged her to return to the Air Force, to reclaim what had been taken. Commercial pilots encouraged her to join the airlines, to have better work-life balance. Her maintenance supervisor told her simply to do whatever made her happy. In the end, the decision came down to a single question. Who was she now, after 18 months of being invisible, after learning that her identity wasn't solely defined by being in a cockpit? She thought about the young maintenance workers she had mentored, the ones who looked at aircraft with passion, who dreamed of flying but couldn't afford the training. She made her decision and called General Hawkins. "Ma'am, I appreciate the offer more than I can express. The fact that the Air Force wants to correct what happened means everything. But I'm going to decline reinstatement. I've spent 18 months learning to be someone other than a fighter pilot, and I've discovered that I'm good at it. I'm valuable in ways that have nothing to do with flying." She paused. "I'm going to accept the airline position, but I'm also going to work part-time in maintenance training. I want to develop programs that teach maintenance workers about advanced aviation systems, that give them paths to move into engineering or flight operations if that's what they want. I want to break down the barriers between pilots and mechanics." General Hawkins laughed softly. "You're probably the only person I know who would turn down a return to flying fighters to work in maintenance training. But I understand. And for what it's worth, I think you'll make a bigger difference in that role. Good luck, Captain Rodriguez." 6 months later, Elena stood in front of a classroom of maintenance workers, wearing her captain's uniform with 4 stripes. She started by showing them pictures of herself in maintenance clothes, covered in grease. "The work you do is not less important than what pilots do. You are the reason aircraft fly safely. Every inspection you complete, every repair you make, that's what keeps people alive. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're just maintenance. There's no just about what you do." She talked about her own experience, about being dismissed and overlooked. "The lesson isn't that I was special and they should have recognized it. The lesson is that they should treat everyone with respect regardless of job title, because you never know who someone is until you take the time to see them as a complete person." The program she developed became a model for the industry. Maintenance workers with aptitude and interest were given paths to flight training, supported by mentorship. Communication protocols between flight crews and maintenance personnel were overhauled. Safety metrics improved as barriers between cockpit and hangar were broken down. Elena flew 3 days a week, loving the return to the cockpit but also appreciating the balance of having other work that mattered. She was recognized wherever she went now, and she used that visibility deliberately to highlight issues that mattered. Captain Morrison and Captain Park from the F-22 squadron stayed in touch. "You should see the new pilots when they hear Reaper is flying 737s, Morrison said with a grin. "They can't believe it. Some think it's a waste of your skills." Elena shook her head. "It's not a waste. I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. I'm flying, which I love. I'm teaching, which I'm good at. And I'm working to make aviation better for everyone. That matters more than flying fighters. Different kind of flying, but every flight is a chance to be excellent. That's all I ever wanted." The businessman from that original flight contacted her a year later, asking if he could take her to dinner to properly apologize. Elena agreed, curious to see if the experience had really changed him. They met at a restaurant near the airport and he arrived looking nervous. "I've been thinking about that flight constantly," he admitted. "About the things I said, the assumptions I made, how I treated you like you didn't matter. It's forced me to examine how I treat everyone, servers, janitors, retail workers, anyone doing a job I consider beneath me. I've been trying to change to see people as people rather than as their job titles. Elena appreciated his honesty. The fact that you're trying is what matters. Most people never examine their own biases, never question their assumptions about worth and value. You had a wake-up call and you're using it to become better. That's all anyone can do. They talked for 2 hours about class and perception, about the invisible barriers that separate people, about how society assigns value based on arbitrary measures like job titles and income rather than character and contribution. The woman from the window seat sent a letter, a long handwritten apology that detailed her own journey of self-examination after the flight. She had been raised to believe that success meant certain markers, education, career, income, appearance, and that people without those markers were somehow less worthy of respect. The flight had shattered those beliefs, forcing her to confront her own privilege and prejudice. She had started volunteering with organizations that helped blue-collar workers access education and career advancement, trying to break down some of the barriers she had benefited from her entire life. Years after the emergency, Elena was invited to speak at a major aviation safety conference. The auditorium was packed with pilots, maintenance personnel, safety inspectors, airline executives, and military officers. She took the stage in her captain's uniform and began with the story everyone knew but that still resonated. 5 years ago, I was sitting in seat 23 Bravo, wearing a maintenance uniform, invisible to everyone around me. The passengers dismissed me as someone who probably cleaned planes. The crew treated me with polite condescension. And I let them make those assumptions because it didn't matter what they thought. I knew who I was and what I was capable of. She described the emergency, the moment when her expertise became necessary, the shock on people's faces when they realized who she actually was. But here's the thing that everyone misses when they tell this story. The lesson isn't that they should have recognized my hidden expertise. The lesson is that they should have treated me with respect regardless of whether I was a legendary fighter pilot or just an ordinary maintenance worker. Because the ordinary maintenance worker is the one who ensures your aircraft is safe to fly. That person deserves respect just as much as any pilot. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. We've built an industry that values some roles over others, that treats pilots as heroes and maintenance workers as invisible support staff. But every single person who touches an aircraft is critical to safety. Every inspection, every repair, every cleaning, every pre-flight check, all of it matters. We need to build a culture that recognizes that breaks down the artificial barriers between different roles, that treats everyone with the respect they deserve. She finished by challenging everyone in the room. The next time you see someone in a work uniform, someone doing a job you consider less important than yours, I want you to remember that you have no idea who that person is, what they know, what they've accomplished, or what they're capable of. Treat them with respect not because they might secretly be a legendary fighter pilot, but because they're a human being doing important work that deserves recognition. That's the real lesson from my story. Not that I'm special, but that everyone deserves to be seen and valued for who they are. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes, but what mattered more to Elena were the conversations afterward. Maintenance workers who thanked her for speaking up for them, for using her platform to advocate for their recognition. Pilots who admitted they had never thought about the dynamics she described, who committed to changing how they interacted with ground crews. Executives who asked for her help developing programs to improve culture and communication in their organizations. Elena continued flying and teaching for many years, never losing her passion for aviation or her commitment to making it better. She trained hundreds of pilots and maintenance workers, all of whom carried forward her lessons about respect, excellence, and the importance of seeing every person's full humanity. The story of the legendary fighter pilot working in maintenance became part of aviation lore, told in training classrooms, discussed in safety meetings, referenced in articles about organizational culture. And every time she walked through an airport in her captain's uniform, she made a point of stopping to talk with maintenance workers, to thank them for their service, to recognize their expertise and value. Because she had been where they were, had experienced the invisibility they faced, and she never wanted them to feel as dismissed as she once had. She used her visibility to shine light on their work, honoring both her past and her present, bringing together all the pieces of who she was into a whole that was greater than any single role could ever be.